"She's not authorized to be in that bed," Meredith said, arms folded like she owned the hospital. "Silverleaf Estates doesn't tolerate misuse of emergency facilities." Lila's lips were pale. Her fever was spiking again, sweat soaking through her maternity blouse. A nurse hesitated, looking from me to the clipboard to Meredith's smug, pearl-draped neck. "I'm her husband. I designed the failover systems for this ER's trauma wing. That bed pinged off my login." I didn't raise my voice, but the beep of my wife's wrist monitor climbing above 102 degrees Fahrenheit made sure they heard every word. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. Meredith scoffed. "Designers don't get privileges. Your little toy monitor on your driveway already broke 3 violations. Don't make it worse." I turned to face her. "I didn't just design it. I wrote the firmware patch that saved 12 minutes per triage case in Zone C." I gestured toward the emergency trauma doors behind me. "You kicked a woman with a 103.7-degree fever out of her monitored bed to settle a zoning dispute. And I hope you're very proud." The nurse looked ready to cry. The ER director peeked from behind the station. Meredith didn't flinch. "My name is Nathan Calver. I'm a systems engineer who helps trauma units keep the lights on, even during blackouts. I usually fix buildings, but Silverleaf Estates was about to teach me how to fix people." The porch swing on my front lawn creaked every night with my wife's weight. She'd sit there for hours, rubbing her stomach, whispering to the baby. That swing was built by my father, a disabled vet who never got to meet his grandchild. It's the only piece of him that remains. The HOA marked it for removal last week. Non-standard structure, they called it. The fetal monitor I brought home last Thursday wasn't junk. It was a short-term patch while our OB's clinic upgraded systems. Lila's pregnancy had been complicated for months. We had backup generators, thermal regulation, and motion sensor alert protocols wired directly through my test server. Every precaution, every line of code written for her. Meredith didn't care. Not when she issued a $3,000 fine for medical clutter. Not when she hand-delivered it while my wife vomited out of the car window. That night, Lila collapsed in our hallway. I rushed her to the ER, only to have Meredith follow us to the staff entrance. She told the security guard she was a compliance officer for Silverleaf Estates. That was enough to stall her discharge, enough to make hospital staff second-guess protocol. Now, here she was, standing by the vending machines while Lila shivered under a heat lamp, refused re-entry. They say HOA rules are about community order. But what do you call it when a community's leader lets a pregnant woman nearly go septic just to feel powerful? Where are you watching from? This isn't the kind of story where I back down. Meredith Langford may run a neighborhood board, but I helped rewrite how hospitals protect people under blackout codes. I built redundancy into machines meant to keep humans alive. I was about to do the same thing to her power trip. One legal clause, one viral video, one live-streamed HOA vote at a time. Silverleaf thought it could push me around. They should have looked closer at who they were trying to humiliate. Meredith didn't say a word as I lifted Lila out of the chair and carried her back to our car. The nurse had tried to offer us a wheelchair, but her supervisor shook her head, glancing nervously at the donor wall behind the front desk. I didn't need a translation. Meredith had pull, and no one wanted to test it. The air outside was thick and wet. Florida heat always hit differently after midnight. Like the air itself didn't want to cool down. I eased Lila into the passenger seat, angled the vents toward her, and cranked the AC. She was barely conscious. All I could think about was the sound of that porch swing back home, the one she'd been using as a sort of makeshift meditation spot for the baby. It creaked when she shifted her weight. That sound used to make me feel safe. Now it made my chest ache. By the time we got back to Silverleaf Estates, a notice was already taped to our door, a red-bordered violation slip with Meredith's signature and the HOA seal. Emergency medical equipment unpermitted, Category C infraction, $3,000 fine. It was time-stamped 9:47 p.m. That was 20 minutes before Lila even collapsed. She'd written us up in advance. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the living room, with one hand on Lila's pulse and the other scrolling through the HOA portal. I needed to understand the scale of this. I started pulling violation records. I wasn't supposed to have access to everything, but when your background includes writing compliance simulation software for hospital administration systems, most community web portals are child's play. And that's when I saw the pattern. Over the last 8 months, the HOA had issued 17 Category C violations related to medical disruption or health hazards. At first glance, they looked like standard citations: oxygen tanks on porches, wheelchair ramps out of compliance, backup generators with visible fuel lines. But dig deeper, and you found something darker. All 17 were issued to households with a pregnant resident, elderly family member, or medically disabled person. Not one went to a healthy single-resident home, and 12 of them had fines over $2,000. Meredith's own street had none. This wasn't just harassment, it was surgical targeting. I clicked through each record, taking screenshots, noting timestamps, matching them to public health alerts and emergency call logs. One family had their gate removed after paramedics couldn't enter. Another had their mailbox disabled during hospice care for aesthetic reasons. This wasn't about rules, it was about control. And if Meredith thought she could do it quietly, she picked the wrong house. The next day, I filed an anonymous inquiry with a local patient advocacy group. I didn't give names, just examples. The rep on the line went silent for a long moment and finally said, "We've heard whispers about HOA interference before, but nothing this precise." I logged off and stepped outside for air. The sun was already burning through the trees. Across the cul-de-sac, Meredith was pruning her roses in a wide-brimmed hat like nothing had happened. 2 houses down, Jerome Beck, the HOA secretary, stood at his mailbox, staring at her with this look I couldn't quite place. Not judgment, not support, just hesitation. I watched him lower his head and shuffle back inside. Meredith caught me looking. She smiled. We didn't speak. That afternoon, I carried the fetal monitor inside. It beeped once, low battery. I set it on the swing and plugged it into the wall outlet I'd installed last winter. The same outlet my father rigged decades ago to power his breathing machine. I thought about ripping it all out. But then I realized this was exactly what she wanted. She wanted me to quit, to strip the porch clean, scrub out every memory, paint over the life we'd built until it looked just like hers. I stood on that swing, the boards warm beneath my feet, and made a decision. If she was going to make this about power, then I was going to show her how much power the truth really had. Jerome Beck didn't speak much at HOA meetings. He usually kept his head down, clipboard in hand, nodding along with whatever Meredith said. On paper, he was the HOA board secretary. In practice, he was a placeholder with a heartbeat, someone to second motions and sign minutes. But that morning, something was off. We were all gathered in the Silverleaf Clubhouse for a compliance forum. Meredith stood at the podium, smiling like she'd just won an award. Behind her, a slideshow cycled through photos of non-conforming violations. Lila's fetal monitor made the cut, blurred slightly but still unmistakable, tagged as item number 4, unauthorized storage. Jerome sat to her right, hands folded tightly. His knuckles were pale. Every time a photo shifted, he blinked fast, like someone taking mental snapshots against his own will. When Meredith leaned in to whisper something, he didn't nod. He just stared straight ahead. I took a seat near the back. I wanted to see how he moved when no one thought he was being watched. Meredith clicked to the next image, a woman's walker resting against her porch steps. "This was left out for 3 consecutive days," she said, voice sharp but sweet. "It violates Silverleaf's uniform exterior standards, Clause 8, subsection D." There was a faint murmur from the crowd. Some nodded. A few looked away. Jerome shifted in his chair. His fingers tapped a silent rhythm on his knee, then stilled. He tugged at his collar, then set his hand back down, jaw locked tight. I'd seen that rhythm before. Paramedics do it when they're counting pulse while listening for breath. It was unconscious, drilled into the body. He wasn't just uncomfortable, he was fighting himself. When the slideshow ended, Meredith opened the floor. No one raised their hand. The silence settled over the room like humidity. Then she gestured toward me. "Mr. Calver, I believe you had some concerns about your recent infraction." She said it like an invitation. It felt like a trap. I stood slowly. "Just one," I said. "Was it your idea to follow my wife into the ER, or did the board vote on that too?" Gasps rippled through the room. Meredith's smile tightened. Jerome's head dropped slightly, but not all the way. He was watching, just not obviously. His shoulders didn't rise like Meredith's did when she braced for conflict. His chest expanded with a slow, deep breath, but he didn't look up. "That incident is outside HOA jurisdiction," Meredith replied smoothly. "But misuse of medical equipment within the neighborhood is our concern." I didn't respond. I just looked directly at Jerome. He blinked once, then again. His fingers twitched. He knew. Meredith called for adjournment before anyone else could speak. As people filed out, she gave me a warning glance, the kind that doesn't say, "Don't do that again," but "You're already losing." Jerome remained seated, still pretending to organize his clipboard. His body said otherwise. I walked past him slowly, giving him room. He didn't stop me, but his pen slipped from his fingers and rolled across the carpet toward my shoe. I bent to pick it up. When I handed it back, our eyes finally met. His weren't hard like Meredith's. They were bloodshot, wet, quiet, and for a half second, they flicked downward to the folded notes in his lap. HOA meeting minutes, I assumed. But then I saw the edge of a sticky tab peeking out. Red. One word was written on it. Septic. That wasn't part of the slideshow. He opened his mouth like he might say something, then closed it. His jaw clicked. He tucked the papers under his arm and stood quickly, brushing past me with a muttered, "Thanks." Outside, Meredith was already in her Lexus, reversing with practiced grace. She didn't even glance back. I stayed in the parking lot a while, watching Jerome's silhouette shrink as he walked home, slow and heavy like his shoes were filled with sand. He hadn't said a word, but I'd heard everything. 3 days later, a letter came by, certified mail. Not a fine, not a warning, a notice of lien intent. I tore the envelope open at the dining room table. Lila was upstairs, trying to rest. Her fever had come down, but her energy was gone. Even walking to the kitchen left her winded. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Legal print, HOA seal embossed in red, all the official theater. The words blurred together at first, until one line snapped everything into clarity. Pending enforcement action due to non-disclosure of infectious condition during community event. I read it twice, then again. My heart beat faster, not with fear, but something colder. They were accusing us of endangering the neighborhood because Lila had attended the HOA's Memorial Day barbecue weeks earlier. She hadn't even known she was sick then. There had been no fever, no symptoms. And now they were leveraging that moment, retroactively, as grounds for a lien. They called it a Category A breach of public health trust. I knew what it really was. Meredith wasn't content with silencing us at the hospital. She wanted our house. She wanted the swing, the porch, the history. She wanted everything. I walked outside to clear my head. The Florida heat was thick, cicadas already screaming from the oaks. A jogger passed by with earbuds in. I barely noticed. But what caught my eye was Meredith's Lexus parked across the street, engine off, windows up, sitting idle like a predator watching from tall grass. She didn't get out, just sat there, sunglasses on, hands folded on the steering wheel. Message received. I turned toward the community park down the road, needing space. The air shifted with the shade of palms overhead, and I spotted something unusual as I passed the central bulletin board. A new flyer. Silverleaf Health and Cleanliness Initiative, community vote imminent. Beneath that, in fine print, were new bylaw proposals, including one about revoking occupancy rights for homes deemed to be in violation of public medical trust. She wasn't just coming for me, she was trying to rewrite the rules. I scanned the crowd by the basketball court. 2 teens shooting free throws, a woman in scrubs watching from a bench, and there, Jerome, pacing near the far edge of the park, phone to his ear. He wasn't alone, he was agitated, gesturing with his free hand. He turned away when he saw me. Whatever conflict was eating at him had gotten worse. I didn't approach, not yet. I needed more. That night, I checked the HOA portal again. The vote Meredith wanted was scheduled for next week. Emergency session, she called it, citing health security breaches within the community. But it wasn't just a vote, it was a trigger clause. If passed, it would let the board act on the lien immediately, without giving us a formal hearing. She was preparing to strip us of everything, legally and publicly, before the baby even came. I looked around our living room, cluttered with prenatal vitamins, pillows, a folded-up wheelchair we'd borrowed just in case. Everything smelled faintly of lavender and plastic from the fetal monitor cables still coiled near the outlet. And then I noticed something else. The porch swing outside, our swing, had a yellow ribbon tied to one of its beams. It hadn't been there that morning. I stepped onto the porch and reached for it. Pinned beneath the ribbon was a note, 4 words, scribbled in sharp, all-caps handwriting. "She's gone too far." There was no name, no signature, but I knew who it came from. Jerome wasn't just watching anymore. He was warning me. I didn't sleep. Instead, I turned my focus to something I could control: data, pattern recognition. The same instincts that kept ICU wings online during electrical storms were now zeroed in on Silverleaf Estates. At 3:17 a.m., I pulled up the architectural render of the neighborhood. Every house, every parcel, every zoning line and utility stub. Not the glossy brochure version, the compliance blueprint that showed the infrastructure spine most residents didn't even know existed. I'd consulted on a municipal fire suppression redundancy upgrade 2 years ago, and I still had the schematics. Silverleaf wasn't just rigid in its rules, it was fragile in its dependencies. Power loops, emergency easements, parcel divisions, what looked like a normal sidewalk in front of Meredith's pristine hedges. That was technically a utility right-of-way tied to a federally subsidized health corridor, a path that had been protected under regional development grant contracts, which meant I zoomed in, highlighted parcel 7C Meredith's address, and there it was, a municipal overlay zone tagged HC-TRI, short for a health critical, triage route interface, meant to ensure first responders could access any address during mass casualty events. That path ran from the west gate, past Meredith's home, and ended directly at my driveway. Not symbolic, literal. My home sat at the designated endpoint of the neighborhood's federal triage route. Our house wasn't just another property, it was a mandated checkpoint for emergency access, which meant any attempt to obstruct it, through lien, eviction, or removal of medical equipment, wasn't just aggressive, it was legally indefensible. A wave of cold clarity hit me. Meredith's crusade wasn't just cruel, it violated the health zoning requirements tied to the entire community's funding. If that access point was jeopardized, the county could freeze the HOA's grant renewal process. Or worse, launch an audit. And audits don't stop with access points. They dig through every record, every lien, every false violation. I stood up and grabbed my phone, opened the secure backup system I'd installed at Memorial General, and cross-referenced the hospital's ER access data with Silverleaf's community grid. Then I pulled the final piece, the ER's staff access log from the night Lila was kicked out, my ID swipe, the fetal monitor's ping, the exact time she was removed, all time-stamped, all redundant, and it all aligned with Meredith's violation ticket, issued while my wife was already en route to the hospital. She'd falsified timing, on record, and weaponized it under the HOA banner. By sunrise, I had a 5-page compiled report, schematics, triage corridor data, hospital access records, visual map overlays. I wasn't just defending my family anymore. I was building a framework to expose the entire HOA's abuse. Lila stirred around 7. She looked better, still pale, but alert. I brought her tea and sat beside her. "Did they back off?" she asked, voice raspy. I shook my head. Number. They escalated. Her eyes fluttered closed for a moment. Then she reached for my hand and gave it the faintest squeeze. "I'm not strong enough to fight them right now," she whispered, "but I know you are." I held the hand like it was the last steady thing in the world. Later that morning, I sent the report, anonymously, to a local media watchdog page, Sunrise Neighborhood Justice. They specialized in HOA overreach stories, mostly smaller stuff, pets, fences, seasonal flags. But this was different. A federal corridor being used as a private war zone? They replied within the hour. "We need a formal interview. You have something big." I didn't respond. Not yet. I still needed one more piece, something inside the HOA, something only Jerome could give. But the timing was shifting. The emergency vote was 4 days away. Meredith wasn't slowing down. She was accelerating. And now I was too. I spent the next morning on edge, waiting for another letter, another fine, another ambush. Instead, silence. No new notices. No HOA foot soldiers taking photos from golf carts. Just a neighborhood pretending nothing was wrong. That was worse. Meredith didn't need to come after us again because the emergency vote was already set. Once that passed, the board would have the authority to enforce the lien. That meant we could be locked out, forcibly removed, or, if she really pushed it, charged for trespassing on our own porch swing. I paced the living room while Lila slept on the couch. The monitor beeped softly from beside her. It wasn't connected to the hospital's system anymore, but I kept it running anyway. Like a heartbeat I could still control. I glanced out the window. Jerome's house sat 2 lots over, blinds drawn. I thought about knocking, but this wasn't a conversation to have on doorsteps. Not yet. He had made his first move with the ribbon. The next step had to be his. That left me one option. Escalate first. By mid-afternoon, I'd gathered the evidence into a digital folder. Schematics, timestamps, photographs, HOA policy contradictions. I uploaded the triage zone overlays and tied them to the exact parcel codes. I didn't post it. Not yet. I sent it to 2 people, the local zoning inspector and a civil liberties attorney whose articles I'd bookmarked months ago after another HOA scandal made headlines. I didn't need them to act yet. I just needed them to see it. By evening, a message came back from the attorney's office. A junior associate, but the subject, line read, "Your HOA is in violation of federal easement law." 3 hours later, the zoning office replied too. They asked if I could meet with their inspector at my property the following morning, quietly. That was the moment it became real. Not emotional, not moral, legal. I sat on the porch swing after the sun went down. The wood was warm from the day's heat. Lila had gone upstairs early, exhausted from just standing too long in the kitchen. That porch, my father's porch, hadn't changed much since he built it. The swing's chains still creaked the same way. The same notches were carved into the beam from when he'd measured my height with a screwdriver. It was where he'd taken his last breath during a spring thunderstorm, too stubborn to go inside until he finished the repairs on the gutter. I'd promised myself that night I wouldn't let anyone undo what he built, and now someone was trying to erase it under the language of policy. The next morning, I opened the HOA portal again. The emergency vote was still active, comments now closed. Meredith had posted a new banner, "Safeguarding Silverleaf, a community responsibility." Beneath it, a blurry image of a fire truck parked on our street. She'd cropped the date and captioned it, "Medical chaos threatens neighborhood harmony." I felt something snap. I stood, grabbed my camera, and walked 3 blocks down to the main boulevard. I recorded a clean shot of the official Silverleaf zoning map posted on the community's stone monument. Then I walked the full triage path, from the west gate, past Meredith's hedges, all the way to my front steps, filming every foot of it. I marked the easement lines in chalk, circling the boundary that defined the federally protected access corridor. I didn't add commentary, just proof. That night, I posted it all to Sunrise Neighborhood Justice. The caption was simple. When an HOA targets the house that keeps their ambulance route open, maybe it's time the neighborhood knows what's really at stake. By morning, the video had 12,000 views. Meredith hadn't seen it yet, but Jerome had. And he left something new on the porch that day, taped to the swing. A printout of the emergency board minutes. One quote circled in red ink. "Pregnancy is not a protected medical exemption under HOA policy." This time, he signed it. Jerome. I waited until nightfall before I knocked on Jerome's door. He didn't answer right away. I could hear the hum of a ceiling fan inside, the shuffle of someone moving, stopping, waiting. The porch light flicked on, then the deadbolt turned. Jerome opened the door halfway. His face was lined, jaw unshaven, eyes bloodshot like sleep hadn't visited him in days. He didn't say anything, just nodded once, stepped aside, and left the door open behind him. His living room was neat but sterile, no family photos, just a folded American flag in a triangular case above the mantel. I didn't ask. I already knew. He was the kind of man who understood protocol more than peace. He gestured to the dining table, where a manila envelope sat between two mugs of untouched coffee. "I kept it," he said finally, sitting down across from me, "even though she told me to shred it. I didn't touch the envelope yet." "She made the call to the hospital," he said. "It wasn't an inquiry, it was a formal complaint. Said your wife posed a neighborhood health risk by seeking unauthorized medical equipment." I sat back, absorbing it. Not surprised, but there was something about hearing it spoken aloud. Formal complaint, unauthorized, as if Lila was contraband and not a human being carrying a child. Jerome slid the envelope toward me. "Minutes from the emergency meeting. I made my own copy before signing off. She doesn't know." I opened it carefully. Inside were typed transcripts, meeting logs, internal emails printed from the HOA account. One message stood out instantly. "We can't afford to let non-compliant medical issues define our image. Eviction is cleaner than leniency." It was sent by Meredith, time-stamped 2 days after the hospital incident. "Cleaner than leniency," I muttered, like she's scrubbing out disease. Jerome's fingers fidgeted with the seam of his shirt. "She threatened to revoke my board status if I didn't vote yes on the emergency bylaw. Said it would keep the community safe." I believed her, for a minute. "You knew Lila was pregnant. You used to be an EMT. You saw how serious it was." "I did." He looked away. "And I sat there anyway." He rubbed his eyes with both palms like he was trying to wipe away more than exhaustion. "She used to do good things," he said, "back when her husband ran the board with her. Before he died, there was still restraint. But now it's just control for control's sake." He looked back at me, more direct this time. "You're not just fighting her, you know. You're fighting everyone who's afraid of rocking the boat. Then it's time someone capsized it." He nodded slowly, reached into his back pocket, and pulled out a USB drive. "Everything I couldn't print, I saved here. It's got security camera timestamps, internal communications, a draft of the next rule proposal she plans to push, one that bans all medical devices from visible areas, even during emergencies." I took it from him like it was dynamite. "You realize what this means, right?" I asked. "That I'll probably lose my board seat?" He chuckled once, bitter. "I don't care. I just want to be able to sleep again." He stood, walked to the window, and pulled the curtain back with 2 fingers. Meredith's house sat directly across the cul-de-sac. Lights still on, front porch glowing like a set piece. "She doesn't know I'm talking to you," Jerome said. "But she knows something's shifted. She'll try to get ahead of it." "Let her try." I tucked the drive into my pocket and stood to leave. Jerome didn't follow me to the door. He stayed at the window, watching. "Hey, Nathan," he said as I opened it. "Yeah? You're not just doing this for your wife. You're doing it for everyone else she buried in silence." I didn't answer. He already knew I knew. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove to the only place that still felt neutral, the Trauma Bay parking lot behind Memorial General. The lot was empty, silent but alive, each yellow line painted like arteries across the asphalt. I used to stand here after overnight system installs, watching the sky change over blinking ambulance lights. It was where I did my best thinking. I plugged Jerome's drive into my laptop, engine idling, vents humming. The files were clean, meticulously organized, exactly how a man like him would keep secrets. The folder structure mirrored HOA meeting dates. Each one was time-stamped and labeled with names, decisions, votes. No fluff. Just raw patterns of abuse. But what caught my attention was a file at the bottom. Unpublished proposals greater than emergency compliance initiative.x. I opened it. It was a draft Meredith hadn't yet introduced to the board, outlining her next plan, an HOA clause that would give the president discretionary authority to deny occupancy to any household deemed medically disruptive. No vote, no hearing, just her. She was formalizing dictatorship, and Jerome had just handed me the sword. I built my counterplan the same way I'd structure a hospital system override, redundant layers, multiple fail-safes, and visual clarity that couldn't be manipulated. The impact came from accumulation, not accusation. I drafted a timeline that read like a diagnosis: symptoms, cause, escalation, exposure. Then I packaged it. First, I built a clean, mobile-friendly web page through a private server. The URL was simple: silverleaftruth.org. The homepage carried one message: if your wife were 7 months pregnant and your HOA kicked her out of the ER, what would you do? Beneath that, I embedded a single autoplay video, Meredith's voice in the board meeting, clipped from Jerome's security feed. Pregnancy is not a protected medical exemption under HOA policy. No context, no commentary. Just her words, her tone, her intent. Below it, a download link to the full report. The Silverleaf suppression files. I knew this wasn't about going viral. It was about visibility, pressure, legitimacy. So I drafted an email to the local zoning office, the city council's community board, 3 neighborhood legal watch groups, and Sunrise Neighborhood Justice. The subject line: Silverleaf HOA violated federal health easements and targeted a pregnant resident to cover it. The body was short. This is what happens when a neighborhood lets silence become policy. We're done being silent. I scheduled the email blast for 6 a.m. on the day of the emergency vote. Not the night before, not after, during. I wanted the leak to hit while the board was still gathering, just as Meredith stood up to speak, while they were checking their phones, watching inboxes flood, hearing whispers in the audience. The timing mattered because this wasn't just information. It was leverage. I closed the laptop as the sun started rising behind the ER. Before I left, I walked to the far wall where Lila and I had waited the night she collapsed, the same plastic bench where Meredith had stood, arms folded, dismissing her pain as unauthorized use. I sat there for a long minute, breathing it all in: the silence, the memory, the war that was now beyond personal. Then I stood and walked back to the car. Silverleaf's vote was tomorrow. So was its reckoning. The night before the vote, I walked the triage path one last time. From the west gate, across the sidewalk that cut past Meredith's roses, down to the edge of my driveway, where the porch swing waited like a quiet sentinel. I marked each step with fresh chalk, bright white arrows tracing the emergency access corridor that Meredith had tried to erase through silence and procedural fiction. But this time, I wasn't walking alone. Jerome stood at the far end of the street, flashlight in hand, checking the sidewalk for cracks and debris. Officially, he was assisting with community maintenance, as announced earlier that week. In reality, he was helping me prepare the battlefield. Earlier that afternoon, I'd received a call from the local zoning inspector. "We've reviewed your report," he said, measured and cautious. "Your easement data checks out. I'll be on site for the vote meeting, quietly, just to observe." That was all I needed. One credible witness, one official who couldn't be brushed off. I spent the next few hours tightening the digital net. The website was running smoothly. The video had been pre-scheduled for simultaneous release across 3 HOA watchdog forums and local parent advocacy pages. Every email recipient had been queued with a backup trigger in case the primary send failed. I even copied the full report to a mirrored server outside the state. If Meredith tried to file a takedown, she'd only be drawing more attention. But there was one more piece left: visibility. I printed 27 flyers, thick stock paper with QR codes that led directly to the Silverleaf Truth homepage. Each flyer included the exact federal zoning clause about emergency medical easements, the one Meredith had violated. And beneath that, bold text: "You are being lied to, and if they can target us, they can target you." I slipped them into mailboxes at dawn, starting with the quiet families, the ones who'd watched, stayed silent, but never voted. I chose homes where elderly parents lived with adult children, where pregnancy signs still hung from door wreaths, where walkers rested beside door frames. They'd been victims too. They just hadn't realized it yet. By the time I got home, the sun was rising, and Lila was sitting on the porch swing, bundled in a blanket. She looked better than she had in days, color in her cheeks, eyes alert. "Did you sleep?" I asked. She shook her head. "Did you?" I sat beside her and wrapped my arm around her shoulders. "I will. After tomorrow." The porch creaked beneath us, familiar and grounding. That sound, the slow stretch of wood under weight, was the one constant in all of this. My father's hands had left stains on those planks. His breath, his time, his presence lingered in every fiber. And now Meredith wanted to mark this spot as a non-conforming structure in her next bylaw revision. Lila leaned her head against my shoulder. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I." "But you're still going through with it." I nodded. "Because if we don't, she wins. And the next family won't even know they're in danger until it's too late." She didn't say anything, just squeezed my hand and let the quiet settle around us. That afternoon, I changed into a collared shirt and grabbed a folder that mirrored the online report, printed, bound, and tabbed. I wasn't just going digital. I wanted hard copies for any resident who claimed they don't do screens. Then I packed the most important item, a portable projector. Jerome had confirmed the clubhouse projector was under maintenance. Meredith's doing, no doubt. She didn't want surprises, but I was bringing my own. By 5:30 p.m., the clubhouse lot began to fill. Residents arrived in pairs, some with strollers, some with folded lawn chairs. Meredith's Lexus was already parked in its usual front spot, glinting under the fading sun like a crown. Inside, her staff set out refreshments, neatly folded agendas, and one updated voting form. A new addition sat at the bottom, Clause 14.3, Emergency Compliance Authority. The same clause from the unpublished draft Jerome had handed me. She wasn't just trying to vote us out. She was trying to crown herself permanent gatekeeper of health. Too late. The clock hit 6 p.m., and every inbox in Silverleaf received the same subject line. "You deserve the truth. Here it is." I stood near the back of the clubhouse as residents filled the folding chairs row by row. The air inside was too still, like a theater moments before curtain. Only the drama about to unfold didn't follow a script Meredith had written. She floated in, perfectly poised, navy dress pressed, and pearls gleaming. Her smile was all performance. She greeted a few residents, offered a handshake to someone in the second row, and took her place at the front of the room beneath the HOA seal mounted on the wall. The rest of the board members filed in behind her like backup singers, all except Jerome. He slipped in through the side door 5 minutes late, wearing a neutral gray button-down. He didn't sit at the board table. Instead, he joined the audience, 2 rows behind me, folder tucked tightly under one arm. Meredith cleared her throat and tapped the microphone. "Good evening, Silverleaf. Thank you for attending this special session regarding neighborhood health standards and our proposed emergency compliance initiative." No one applauded. A few murmurs passed between neighbors. "Before we begin," she continued, "I want to address a certain digital smear campaign making rounds online. Some of you may have received an email this evening containing inaccurate, slanderous claims about our community's leadership." Her voice hardened slightly. "Please know, the HOA considers these messages malicious interference and we are pursuing legal remedies." A few heads turned toward me. I didn't move. She adjusted the mic. "Now, back to the matter at hand." She began reading from a printed agenda, walking through bylaws and votes already rubber-stamped. Her rhythm was calculated, calm enough to appear controlled, fast enough to prevent questions. That's when I set the projector down on the far table and flicked the switch. The soft whir filled the silence like a warning. A bright beam lit the back wall just as she reached Clause 14.3. I let the video autoplay. No title card, no voiceover. Just Meredith's own words from the board meeting Jerome recorded. "Pregnancy is not a protected medical exemption under HOA policy." The audio was clear. Her tone was unmistakable, calculated, dismissive. The room shifted, back straightened, whispers rose. Someone gasped audibly. Meredith froze mid-sentence. I walked forward with the printed dossier in hand. "This is your board president," I said calmly, "stating on record that Silverleaf Estates has no obligation to accommodate pregnancy under any circumstance. That includes emergency medical care, health equipment, and temporary needs of high-risk households." Her jaw twitched. "Mr. Calver, this is highly inappropriate." "No. What's inappropriate is your attempt to rewrite the community charter to consolidate medical authority under a private HOA. What's inappropriate is falsifying a lien against my property while my wife was hospitalized. And what's illegal, I held up the folder, is denying public access to a federally protected health easement. I turned to the residents. That sidewalk out there, the one Meredith wants to patrol like a private checkpoint, it's part of a federal triage corridor funded by your tax dollars. She tried to weaponize that space to evict us, and she lied about the basis for it. A woman in the front row stood. Is this true? Jerome rose from behind me. I was there. I recorded the minutes. Everything you just heard is accurate. Meredith's voice cracked for the first time. This is out of order. Jerome walked to the front, laid his own folder on the table, and looked directly at her. No, he said. This is overdue. The zoning inspector stood quietly near the exit, notebook in hand. He hadn't said a word, but I saw him nod. The projector kept playing. Clips transitioned to side-by-side overlays. My property, the triage map, the emergency corridor. The case built itself. Someone in the third row raised their hand. Can we table the vote until this is investigated? Another voice joined. I want her removed from the board. Then another. Is this even legal? Meredith backed away from the podium, face stiff. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. I stepped back, letting the room do what it needed to. The truth was no longer mine to hold. It belonged to them now. The room had changed, not in noise or volume, but in temperature. The kind of shift you only notice when a crowd stops seeing itself as watchers and starts recognizing its own power. Meredith must have felt it too. Her fingers tightened around the podium, but she didn't speak. She knew if she opened her mouth now, it would only feed the fire. The first hand went up from the second row. What legal right does the HOA have to ignore federal easement designations? It came from a man in his 60s with a cane resting beside his chair. His wife sat beside him, arms crossed, lips pressed tight. Jerome answered first. None. According to our own charter, any federal designation overrides HOA policy. That includes medical emergency corridors. Another voice, this time younger. Why weren't we told about this? I live along that same sidewalk. If my mother needs an ambulance, are you telling me the board could have blocked it? Meredith stepped forward, clearing her throat. That's a mischaracterization. The vote was meant to protect the visual integrity of Silverleaf. The visual integrity? Someone echoed, incredulous. Are you hearing yourself? Lila walked in just then. She was wearing a light shawl over her shoulders, hair pulled back, and even from across the room, you could see the effort it took for her to move. But the baby bump was undeniable, and so was the silence that fell when people turned and saw her. She walked to the front, nodded once at me, and looked at Meredith. I was the one in the ER bed, she said. You filed a complaint that forced hospital staff to move me into a waiting room with a 103-degree fever. No one interrupted, not even Meredith. I wasn't contagious. I wasn't disruptive. I was trying to protect my child. But you... Her voice broke, and she steadied herself with a breath. You thought protecting this neighborhood's reputation was more important than a woman's life. The room didn't erupt. It inhaled, and then came the slow turning of heads toward the board table. Meredith reached for a printed stack of papers, likely a prepared speech, but her hand trembled. That's when the zoning inspector stepped forward from the back. My name is Ronald Dempsey, he said, holding up a HOA badge. I've reviewed the material shared by Mr. Calver and Mr. Beck. I've also reviewed the HOA's documentation regarding Parcel 7C's proximity to a federally designated triage corridor. He turned slowly, making sure everyone was listening. This board's actions violated both the easement's protective intent and basic medical access protocols. At this time, I'm issuing a formal recommendation to suspend enforcement authority of the HOA pending investigation. The room finally did erupt, not in chaos, but in affirmation. A wave of people stood, some clapping, some just nodding. A woman in the back shouted, "Revote the board!" Others picked it up. "Revote, revote." Meredith's mask cracked. "This is a smear job," she snapped. An engineered coup by a man who couldn't follow basic rules. I stepped forward, calm. I followed every rule, every guideline, every clause. You broke them. A man near the side door stood. Motion to remove Meredith Langford from her seat as HOA president. Seconded, shouted someone else. Jerome stepped forward and raised his hand. Let the record show this motion carries sufficient support to trigger a vote tonight under Section 3.1 of the emergency session rules. Meredith tried to leave, but 3 board members, her own, stood in her way. They didn't touch her. They didn't have to. She just stared at them, jaw tight, and then turned to the exit with a look I'll never forget. Not anger, not shame, just disbelief. Like the kingdom she built on rules and intimidation had finally evaporated, and no one had rushed to catch her crown. By the time the meeting adjourned, Meredith Langford was no longer president of anything, and the porch swing back home still creaked the same way in the wind, exactly where it belonged. They removed the HOA sign the following morning. It came down without ceremony, no speech, no press release. Just 2 maintenance workers in gray uniforms unbolting it from the clubhouse wall, while a few residents watched from their porches. Meredith's name was still on the letterhead, but it carried no power anymore, not after what happened the night before. The board had voted unanimously to suspend all pending enforcement actions. Jerome had officially resigned, citing personal reasons, but not before signing a formal statement supporting the investigation. And the zoning inspector, he promised a full audit of every lien issued in the past 2 years. But I didn't wait around to hear the fallout. I sat on the porch swing with Lila, her head resting on my chest, the early morning sun turning her hair almost gold. The baby kicked. She laughed softly, hand on her belly, eyes closed. I could have cried right then and there, but I didn't. The fight was over. And the house, the porch, the swing, the memory of my father carved into the grain of the wood beneath our feet. It was still ours. Later that week, we received a letter, not from the HOA, but from a group of residents who had gathered informally. They wanted to form a new committee, one rooted in transparency, accountability, and care for the medically vulnerable. They asked if I would review their charter. I said yes. We didn't need revenge. We needed a future that learned from what had happened. A few days after that, someone left a gift on our porch swing, a wooden plaque. It read, "Here we made them listen." I mounted it right above the swing chain, where the breeze could rock it softly against the siding. To the neighbors who stood with us, to the ones who opened their eyes too late but still chose to speak, and even to the ones who stayed silent, I hoped they understood something now. This wasn't about a lien. It was about dignity. It was about a woman with a fever and a child not yet born. About a community that forgot what it meant to protect its own. About what happens when rules become weapons. And about what happens when someone dares to push back. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. We took our street back with truth.